The first time Lake Hollow security stopped me on my own fire road, I thought it was a mistake. The second time, I knew it was policy. I was driving a flatbed loaded with fence posts when a white security SUV pulled sideways across the road, about 400 feet behind my back pasture. The guard got out and held up one hand. He told me the road was restricted to Lake Hollow residents, emergency personnel, and approved contractors. I looked past him. The road he was blocking ran through my land, not beside it, through it. For nearly 20 years, I had used that gravel road to reach the wooded ridge behind my house. Forestry work, fence repair, brush clearing, storm cleanup, fire access. It was not a subdivision road. It existed before Lake Hollow Estates was built. I asked the guard who told him to restrict access. He pointed toward a brand new black steel gate farther down the road. It had a keypad, 2 stone columns, and a sign reading, Lake Hollow Secondary Access, Authorized Vehicles Only. That gate had not been there 3 days earlier. I parked, got out, and walked closer. The left stone column sat nearly 5 feet inside the gravel shoulder. The right column sat directly across the wide section of road, where fire engines had historically turned. The opening itself looked too narrow. The guard told me the HOA had upgraded security because residents were concerned about unauthorized vehicles entering from the rural side. I asked whether he understood that I was the rural side. He did not laugh. He asked for my name and address. I gave him both. Then I asked for his supervisor. 10 minutes later, HOA President Deborah Sloan arrived in a golf cart with the property manager. Deborah told me the board had taken control of the Western Fire Road for safety reasons. I asked what document gave them control. She said Lake Hollow had maintained the lower section for years. I asked again, what deed? What easement? What agreement? She changed the subject. She said the road connected directly to HOA common property and had been incorporated into the community's emergency circulation plan. That phrase mattered. Emergency circulation. I knew enough about rural fire access to know that if she was telling the truth, there should be county or fire department documentation. I also knew the new gate looked wrong. Too narrow, too decorative, too much stone too close to the travel lane. I asked whether the fire marshal had approved it. Deborah said the contractor handled permits. I asked whether fire apparatus had tested the clearance. She said I was making a simple security improvement, unnecessarily complicated. Then she told the guard not to let me through until I registered the truck with Lake Hollow Security. That was the moment the issue stopped being irritating and became serious. I did not ram the gate. I did not move the security SUV. I did not threaten anybody. I backed the flatbed down the road, returned to my house, and opened the metal file cabinet in my workshop. Inside was the deed, an old forestry map, a county access map, and a recorded instrument from 1989 showing a 30-foot fire and maintenance corridor running exactly where Lake Hollow had just installed its gate. The corridor did not belong to the HOA. The underlying road was on my parcel. The recorded access language existed so fire crews, utility personnel, forestry crews, and the property owner could move through without obstruction. I called a surveyor, then my attorney, then the county fire marshal's office. By the next afternoon, the surveyor had already found one of the original monuments. By the end of the week, the fire marshal would measure the new opening himself, and when he did, he would ask Deborah one question she had no good answer for. Why had the HOA installed a decorative security gate inside a recorded fire access corridor without verifying emergency vehicle clearance? Lake Hollow wanted control of my road. Instead, they had just built their gate in the one place the county cared about more than aesthetics. My name is Nathan Cole. I am 56 years old, and I own 43 acres outside Boone, North Carolina. Most of the property is wooded, a few acres are pasture, and there is a house, an equipment shed, and a small creek that disappears into the trees near the eastern boundary. I bought the land from my uncle in 2004. He had owned it since the 1970s. The fire road was already old then. It started as a logging track. Over time, it was widened and stabilized because the ridge behind the property was difficult to reach from the public road. After a brush fire in the late 1980s, the county encouraged several landowners in the area to preserve access for emergency vehicles. That was when the recorded fire and maintenance corridor appeared in the property records. The road was never glamorous. Crushed stone, drainage dips, a wider turnout near the ridge, a culvert near the creek. No streetlights, no curbs, no painted lines. But it worked. I used it every season. In spring, I cleared fallen limbs. In summer, I checked brush and invasive growth. In fall, I hauled fencing material. In winter, I used it to reach the upper woods after storms. Fire crews used it once during a lightning strike on neighboring land. They never reached my house. They did not need to. They used the road to get equipment closer to the ridge before the fire spread. That experience stayed with me. Access does not feel important until somebody needs it quickly. Lake Hollow Estates came much later. A developer bought more than 200 acres east of me and built a gated mountain community with 78 homes. Large clubhouse, pool, walking trails, a decorative pond, and stone entrance walls. For the first several years, the relationship was easy. The original developer understood the fire road. His engineers actually improved a short section near the subdivision boundary because construction traffic had damaged it. He never claimed ownership. He never locked it. He never sent security patrols up my side. Then the developer turned the association over to the homeowners. That was when the language started changing. The road went from old fire access to western service route, then secondary community access, then security corridor. I noticed the change in HOA newsletters long before anyone physically stopped me. At first, I ignored it. What Lake Hollow called the road internally did not change the deed. Then Deborah Sloan became president. Deborah liked controlled access. She expanded the camera system, added license plate readers at the main entrance, hired a new security contractor, and installed decorative fencing around the pool and maintenance yard. Most of that had nothing to do with me. Then she decided the western edge looked unsecured. Residents occasionally saw farm trucks, forestry vehicles, or utility crews on the fire road, and some assumed those vehicles were entering Lake Hollow illegally. Deborah began talking about sealing the back entrance. That phrase concerned me. The western route had never been a public entrance for residents, but it also was not something the HOA could simply seal. I emailed the property manager and attached the old access document. I explained that the road crossed my parcel and needed to remain available for lawful fire, maintenance, and landowner access. The property manager thanked me, and nothing happened for several months. Then Lake Hollow hired a new security company. The SUVs appeared. One drove the fire road all the way to my pasture before turning around. I stopped the driver and told him he was on private land. He apologized. The next week, another one came through. Then a third. I sent another email. This time Deborah replied personally. She said security patrols were necessary to protect community assets near the western boundary. I told her that protection did not authorize patrols across my land. She said the road had historically functioned as a shared access route. I asked for the recorded document creating that shared HOA right. She never sent one. If you live beside an HOA, gated community, resort, or mountain development, this is where old access records matter. A road can look shared because several people have used it over the years. But appearance does not tell you who owns the land, who holds an easement, or what that easement actually allows. If you have ever had a neighbor, or HOA, start treating your road, driveway, trail, or field entrance like part of its infrastructure, leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who owns rural land near a development, because access disputes can become expensive the moment someone installs a gate before checking the records. I did not object to Lake Hollow protecting its property. I objected to them protecting it from me by taking control of mine. The first physical sign of trouble was a camera pole. Lake Hollow installed it beside the lower section of the fire road. The pole itself appeared to be on HOA land, but the camera pointed uphill toward my property. I did not like it, but I did not assume it was illegal. Then came a sign, "Authorized Lake Hollow access only." That sign was closer to the road. I photographed it. A week later, the security patrol stopped one of my forestry contractors and made him turn around. He called me confused. He had been working on my land for years. I contacted the security supervisor. He told me the road was now controlled by Lake Hollow. I asked what title document he had reviewed. He had not reviewed one. The HOA had given his company an access map. That map became important later. It showed the fire road in the same color as Lake Hollow private streets. No parcel line, no ownership note, no easement label. Just one continuous route. To a security contractor, it looked like HOA property. I emailed Deborah again. This time Maya Foster, my attorney, was copied. Maya handled land use disputes, easements, and access conflicts. She told Lake Hollow clearly that the road crossed my parcel, that the HOA had not demonstrated any right to control my access, and that security personnel should not interfere with lawful entry. The HOA attorney responded. He did not claim ownership. Instead, he said Lake Hollow had maintenance and emergency use rights associated with historical access. That was more careful language. Maya requested the recorded easement supporting those rights. What came back was not what Deborah expected. The instrument described a 30-foot fire and maintenance corridor. The benefited parties were emergency services, utility personnel under certain conditions, forestry and maintenance users tied to the affected parcels, and the underlying landowners. Lake Hollow HOA was not named. Its later subdivision plat referenced the existing corridor, but did not acquire exclusive control over it. Then Deborah shifted to safety. She argued uncontrolled use created a security risk and that a gate would protect residents while still allowing authorized emergency entry. Maya warned her in writing not to install anything affecting the corridor until clearance, ownership, and fire access requirements were verified. That letter went out 12 days before the gate appeared. 12 days. Then the contractor arrived. Stonemasons first, then steel installers. By the time I saw the completed gate, the columns were in, the keypad was mounted, and the opening was narrower than the travel width farther uphill. And Lake Hollow Security had instructions to control passage. The contractor invoice later showed the project cost more than $30,000. Custom steel, stone veneer, keypad, camera integration, electrical work, and landscaping. It was not a temporary barrier. It was a permanent statement. Lake Hollow believed the road was theirs to manage. The security company received a written directive identifying the Western Fire Road as restricted HOA access. That directive included my parcel number, not as private property, but as an adjacent tract requiring authorization. That wording angered me more than the gate. Someone had reduced ownership to an access problem. Then security stopped me with the flatbed. That brought the dispute into the open. Maya sent a formal demand the same afternoon. Do not block the landowner. Do not patrol beyond the HOA boundary. Do not alter the road. And preserve all gate plans, permits, contractor communications, security instructions, and board records. The HOA attorney responded that Lake Hollow would maintain current security procedures while reviewing the matter. That decision lasted less than 48 hours, because Thomas Avery, the surveyor I hired, found the boundary. The stone columns were not where Lake Hollow thought they were. The right column was partly outside HOA property. The gate opening itself crossed the fire access corridor, and the camera pole was farther into the corridor than anyone had realized. Thomas called me before finishing the field work. He said the title issue was clearer than expected. Then he said something else. The gate looked too tight for the full corridor width. He could not speak for the fire marshal, but he told me I had been right to call one. Thomas completed the survey 2 days later. He reconstructed my eastern boundary using recorded monuments and the Lake Hollow subdivision plat. Then he overlaid the 1989 fire and maintenance corridor. The result was easy to understand. The gravel road sat mostly on my parcel as it climbed the ridge. Near the Lake Hollow boundary, the corridor widened to allow turning and emergency approach. The HOA gate cut directly across that widened area. One stone column sat partly inside the recorded corridor. The other narrowed the practical opening, and the decorative landscaping further reduced shoulder clearance. Then Thomas measured the distance between fixed obstacles. I wrote the number down. It was less than the full clear width shown on the old access plan. That did not automatically make the gate illegal. Fire code requirements depend on local standards, road classification, and apparatus needs, but it was enough to justify review. Maya pulled every county record she could find: original fire access correspondence, subdivision approvals, developer notes, road maintenance history, and emergency maps. One old planning document included a comment from the fire department during Lake Hollow's original development review: existing western fire access to remain unobstructed unless alternate approved access is provided. That note was never a deed by itself, but it showed the developer had been told the corridor mattered. Another sheet showed the western route as emergency support access. Not a resident entrance, not a security checkpoint, not a recreational road. Support access. Then we looked at Lake Hollow's gate permit. That was where things got messy. The HOA had obtained an electrical permit and a general construction approval for the gate structure. But the application site sketch showed the gate fully inside HOA property and did not accurately show the recorded fire corridor. The county reviewer had approved what was submitted. No one had flagged the old access issue because it was missing from the sketch. The contractor had asked whether fire access needed separate approval. An email from the property manager said the HOA was replacing an existing service control point and expected no special review. There had been no existing gate. That statement was wrong. Then we received the board emails. One resident had complained about seeing non-HOA trucks on the western road. Deborah replied that the board was working to secure the route. Another board member asked whether the road was actually HOA property. Deborah wrote that maintenance history gave the association sufficient control. Maya read that sentence and shook her head. Maintenance history can matter in some disputes, but it does not automatically turn land ownership into HOA ownership. Then came the most damaging email. The property manager forwarded Maya's warning about the recorded fire corridor to Deborah before construction began. He recommended delaying installation until a survey and fire review could be completed. Deborah replied that the gate project had already been approved, and postponing it would create unnecessary cost. That was the decision, not ignorance. A warning, then a choice to proceed. Meanwhile, I installed 2 trail cameras on my side of the road. Not to provoke anyone, but to document use. Over the next week, they recorded Lake Hollow security SUVs driving past the HOA boundary several times. One patrol went almost half a mile onto my land. Another stopped beside my forestry shed. There was no emergency, no call, no utility issue, just routine patrol. Maya sent the footage to the security company. Their general manager responded immediately. He said his employees had been working from the HOA access map and would suspend patrols beyond the disputed boundary, pending clarification. That was the first practical concession. Then the fire marshal scheduled an inspection. His name was Carl Bennett. Carl asked me not to frame the issue for him before he arrived. He wanted the records, the survey, the gate plans, and the actual site. That was fine with me. I was not asking for a favor. I wanted someone with authority over emergency access to tell us whether the gate was acceptable. Deborah apparently believed the inspection would validate her safety argument. Instead, it became the moment everything reversed. Carl arrived in a county vehicle on a cold Tuesday morning. He brought a deputy fire inspector and a measuring wheel. Thomas was there, Maya was there, and Lake Hollow sent Deborah, the property manager, the HOA attorney, the gate contractor, and the security supervisor. Carl started with the road. He looked at the old fire access plan, then the current survey, then the gate. He asked whether the gate had a fire department override. Yes, the contractor showed him, and that part was compliant. Then Carl measured the clear opening. He looked at the stone columns, the landscaping, the approach angle, the shoulder, and the turning area. He asked the contractor whether a fire apparatus had ever tested the gate. No. He asked whether the fire department had approved the final placement. No. He asked whether the recorded corridor had been shown on the permit drawing. The contractor said he worked from the HOA site sketch. The property manager admitted the sketch did not show the full corridor. Carl did not raise his voice. He simply kept taking measurements. Then he walked the road uphill, stopped at the wider turnout, looked back toward the gate, and said the new installation reduced useful access at the exact point where larger vehicles needed maneuvering room. Deborah argued that the gate improved safety by controlling unauthorized traffic. Carl answered that security and fire access were different issues. A security feature could not create an emergency access problem. Then he asked who owned the road surface under the gate. Thomas answered that the underlying parcel was mine, the recorded corridor crossed it, and Lake Hollow had no exclusive control right shown in the documents. That shifted the issue beyond fire code. The HOA had installed a gate controlling passage over land it did not own. The attorney asked whether Lake Hollow could maintain a gate if the owner consented. Potentially, yes, subject to clearance and emergency requirements. I had not consented. Then Carl reviewed the original Lake Hollow development note. Existing western fire access to remain unobstructed unless alternate approved access is provided. Lake Hollow had 2 regular entrances, but nothing in the file showed the western corridor had been formally abandoned as emergency support access. Carl said the county would not treat it as closed simply because the HOA wanted more security. Then came the key conclusion. The gate, in its current position and configuration, could not remain as the controlling point of the corridor. It had to be relocated or redesigned so that the recorded access corridor remained clear. Emergency maneuvering space was preserved. Lawful landowner access was not blocked, and any future security control sat entirely on property where Lake Hollow actually had authority. Deborah asked whether a wider gate would solve the problem. Carl said width was only part of it. Location mattered, ownership mattered, turning clearance mattered, and the fixed stone columns mattered. That was the legal and practical reversal. Lake Hollow had built the gate in the name of safety. The fire marshal was telling them their safety project interfered with emergency access. Then Maya raised the patrol issue. The security supervisor confirmed his company had been instructed to control and patrol the road as HOA access. The survey showed portions of those patrols occurred on my land. The supervisor told Deborah his company would not resume those patrols without written proof of authority. That was another loss of control. Then the HOA attorney asked whether I would consider granting Lake Hollow a formal gate management easement. No, I did not need an HOA gate controlling my fire road. I was willing to discuss emergency coordination. I was willing to coordinate responder codes, and I was willing to let the county regulate what the corridor required. I was not willing to give Lake Hollow permanent control simply because they had already spent money. That distinction mattered. The county issued a written correction notice. Lake Hollow had a deadline to submit a compliant relocation plan. Until then, the gate could not be used to obstruct my lawful access. The security company was instructed by its own management to leave the gate open during the correction period. For the first time since the project began, I drove my truck through without asking anyone. The road had not changed. The deed had not changed. Only the HOA's assumption had. The correction process exposed just how expensive the gate had become. Lake Hollow could not simply slide it 6 feet to one side. The stone columns were tied to underground electrical conduit. The camera system was mounted through one column. Landscaping had irrigation lines, and the decorative wall connected to the gate assembly. Relocation required demolition, new footings, electrical work, and a revised site plan. Then the sheriff's office became involved in the access dispute, not because anyone was arrested, but because Maya wanted a formal record showing that Lake Hollow Security had repeatedly interfered with my access after notice of the ownership issue. A deputy reviewed the survey, security footage, and correspondence. He documented the complaint as a property access dispute and warned the security company not to block lawful passage while title rights were unresolved. The company had already reached the same conclusion. Its contract manager told Lake Hollow the patrol map needed to be corrected, and the road beyond the HOA boundary was removed from routine patrol. That ended the security takeover almost immediately. Then Lake Hollow's insurer asked questions. Why had the gate been built after written notice of the fire corridor? Why had the property manager recommended delay? Why was the permit sketch incomplete? Why were security personnel directed onto non-HOA property? Nobody had one answer that fixed everything. The contractor argued it relied on HOA representations. The HOA argued the contractor should have identified the fire access issue, and the designer argued the site information provided to him was incomplete. Those arguments continued between professionals. Again, I stayed focused on restoration. I wanted unobstructed use of my road. The gate moved off the controlling point. The survey costs covered. Attorney fees addressed. Damaged gravel and shoulder areas repaired. Security patrols stopped. And a written acknowledgement that Lake Hollow did not own or exclusively control the fire road. Maya sent the demand. The HOA attorney recommended settlement. Deborah resisted. She told the board the road would become a security vulnerability if the gate moved. That argument finally turned residents against her, because the fire marshal had not ordered Lake Hollow to abandon security. He had ordered them to secure their own property without blocking a recorded corridor. That was different. The emergency board meeting was crowded. Carl did not attend. He had already issued the county position. The HOA attorney summarized it. The gate had to move, the road access issue had to be corrected, and the patrol map was wrong. Then residents saw the email timeline. Maya's warning. Property manager recommends survey and fire review. Deborah says delay is unnecessary. Construction proceeds. Fire marshal later finds the placement unacceptable. A homeowner asked why the board did not spend a few $100s on a survey before spending more than $30,000 on a gate. Nobody had a good answer. Another resident asked whether the gate had actually stopped any documented crime. No evidence was presented. Another asked whether my road had ever been a public back entrance for residents. No. Then someone asked what would happen during a brush fire if a large apparatus needed the full turn. That question ended the aesthetics debate. The board voted to comply with the fire marshal's correction plan immediately. Then it voted to suspend Deborah's authority over security and infrastructure projects pending review. She voted against the motion, but it passed anyway. A new design was prepared. The replacement security gate moved deeper onto Lake Hollow property, where it controlled only the HOA's actual maintenance spur. The fire road itself remained open within the recorded corridor. A separate emergency bollard system was considered, but the county required any future obstruction to meet access standards and respect ownership. The stone columns came down first, then the steel gate, then the landscaping island. The excavation looked almost absurd. Lake Hollow had spent weeks building an impressive entrance. Now another crew was removing it, because the board had never confirmed the one thing that mattered, where control actually began. The new gate went in about 40 yards east of the old location, on Lake Hollow property. behind the actual boundary, outside the critical turning area. It controlled access to an HOA maintenance spur and nothing else. The fire road remained clear. No stone columns in the corridor, no security SUV blocking my truck, and no keypad required for me to reach my own woods. The new installation passed county review. The security company received a corrected patrol map marking my parcel as private. No routine patrol, no access control. Emergency coordination remained exactly what it should have been. Fire department first, landowner access preserved, and HOA security limited to HOA property. Lake Hollow reimbursed my survey costs and a substantial part of my legal expenses as part of the settlement. The damaged shoulder near the original gate was repaired, drainage gravel was replaced, and the HOA signed a written acknowledgement that it did not own the road across my parcel and held no exclusive right to control passage there. That document went into my property records. I also gave a copy to the new HOA president. Yes, new president. Deborah did not survive the internal review politically. Residents learned that the gate project had moved forward despite multiple warnings, that security had been patrolling land outside Lake Hollow, and that the association had spent money correcting a structure that never should have been installed where it was. A recall petition began, and Deborah resigned before the vote. The new president, Mark Collins, handled the road differently. He called me before making any changes near the western boundary, not after, before. We met with the property manager and reviewed the survey together. Mark asked what Lake Hollow actually needed. I told him, their residents did not need my fire road. Their security did not need it. Their maintenance crews only needed access to HOA property. Emergency responders needed the corridor clear. That was all. The solution was simple once nobody tried to turn convenience into ownership. Several months later, a storm dropped trees across the upper ridge. I drove the fire road with a chainsaw and tractor. No security stop, no gate problem, no argument. The following summer, a small brush fire started on another parcel after a lightning strike. The fire department used the western corridor. A brush truck came through first, then a larger unit positioned near the turnout. They did not need to wait for an HOA manager. They did not need a resident code, and they did not need to squeeze between decorative stone columns. They simply used the road. The fire was contained before it reached the ridge. That afternoon, I stood near the old gate site and looked at the tire tracks. That was the clearest ending I could have asked for. The road was doing what it had always been meant to do. If this story made you think about private roads, fire lanes, easements, emergency access, HOA security, or gates built too quickly, share it with someone who owns land beside a gated community or newer development. Save the video if you ever face an access dispute, because deeds, surveys, old development plans, contractor emails, fire access records, and camera footage can matter far more than whoever has the newest sign or the fanciest gate. And tell me in the comments what you would have done if HOA security started stopping you on your own road, then installed a gate inside a recorded fire access corridor. If you enjoy property rights stories where ordinary owners win with evidence, surveys, experts, and lawful process instead of reckless retaliation, subscribe for the next one. I never tore Lake Hollow's gate down. I never blocked their entrance. I never disabled their cameras. I never chased security vehicles. I asked one question. Who has the right to control this road? They had a security map. I had a deed. They had a new gate. I had a recorded fire access corridor. They called it emergency circulation. The fire marshal measured the opening. They said the road was under HOA control. The survey showed otherwise. And when the county reviewed the project, the solution was not complicated. Move the gate. Move it onto HOA property. Keep the fire corridor clear, and let security protect what the HOA actually owns. That was all. Lake Hollow spent weeks trying to turn an old fire road into a controlled community entrance. In the end, the road stayed where it had always been. The only thing that moved was their gate.